In this lesson, we're going to be taking a look at pages 36 and 37 in the Alfred All-in-One Piano Book. And before we learn how to play Marianne here, I want to review these two chords that the book has introduced over the last several pieces. The first chord is the C major chord, and the other one is this G7, what's really called a tetrachord, and I explained that in a previous lesson. So let's review these things. So if you look over on page 36, you'll find that these chords are illustrated against the keyboard with the right hand. So here is the C major chord, or also called a triad, because it's an arrangement of three notes, in this case C, E, and G, C, E, and G in the fourth octave, fingers 1, 3, and 5. This is also called a triad because these three notes are arranged as skips, that is C to E. Remember, that's a skip or a size of 3, and E to G is also a skip. So a triad are three notes arranged as skips, or skips in relation to one another. Then, of course, there's this G7 chord, and the notes from the bottom, or bass, going up are B in this third octave, B3, and then F and G in the fourth octave. So the fingering is your thumb, or 1 on B3, fourth finger on F4, and fifth finger on G4. And you might remember in a previous lesson when we were doing this for the left hand, same chord, right, BFG, I had given you that bit of an acronym from the Roald Dahl books, Big, Friendly, Giant. So that's how you remember how to play this, BFG. And the reason I'm calling this a tetrachord, and this is actually valuable to review, is because this is really what's called a G7 chord, which consists of the following four notes. So I'm going to do this with my right hand, starting on G4. So the four notes are G. I'm going to skip up to B. Now I'm in the fifth octave. I'm going to keep skipping up to D, and finally skipping up to F. So it's a tetrachord because there are four tetra notes in this group. And as you probably remember, the word chord simply means a group of notes. So a tetrachord is a group of four notes. In this case, just like the triad, they are arranged as skips in relation to one another. G to B, that's a skip. B to D, another skip, and DF. Put them all together, and this is called a G7 chord. And why a seventh? Well, because from the lowest note G of this tetrachord to the highest note F is an interval of a 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Now let's get into a little bit more detail. Let's go back to that triad on C. So the C major triad, 1, 3, 5 on C, E, and G. So the lowest of this arrangement of three notes, all, as I was saying, arranged as skips in relation to one another, the lowest note is called the root. So C is the root of the C major triad. Then E, the middle note, is called the third, which sounds confusing because it's not the third note, right? G is the third note. The reason this is called the third is because it is a third above the root C. So this is the root, the third, so a third in relation to C, and then G is an interval of 5 above the root, so this is called the fifth of the chord, or the fifth of the triad. So root, third, because it's a size of 3 above the root, and the fifth because it's a size of 5 above the root. And if you're not entirely clear on that, just count. C, D, E, F, G, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right, now let's go over to that G7 tetrachord. Right, so if you're curious about the fingers I'm using, it's just simply 1, 2, 3, and 5. Look, there are 4 notes, you've got 5 fingers, so you know you're going to leave just one finger out, so either the 3rd finger or the 4th finger. I mean, you might do 1, 2, 3, 4, but this is kind of awkward. You see how I have to end up kind of rotating my wrist to the right. So 1, 2, 3, 5, or maybe 1, 2, 4, 5, although this is also a bit awkward. Those are really the only 2 viable options, but most people feel most comfortable with 1, 2, 3, 5. So as far as labeling these notes goes, well, G, because it's the bottom of this arrangement of all skips, is the root. B is the 3rd, just like we had done with the C major triad. Then D is the 5th, because it's 5 above the root G. And as we already determined, just based on the name of this tetrachord, F is the 7th, because it's 7 above G, which I had demonstrated just moments ago. So root, 3rd, 5th, and 7th. Now, going back to what the book actually asks you to do, you'll notice that this G7 chord is missing one of those notes because it only has 3 notes that you're actually playing, B, F, and G. So what's missing? Well, the D, right? Because we're playing B, and we're playing F, and we're playing G. Certainly not in this configuration, but we're missing that D. So if you remember from our previous lesson, what we're doing down here is just a rotation or a permutation, or what's technically called an inversion of this G7 tetrachord. So we don't start with G on the bottom or in the bass, but we start with B, that's the 3rd of the tetrachord. And then we go up to F, which is the 7th of the tetrachord. And then the very top note becomes G, which is the root of the tetrachord. So all these pitches, G or B or F, they retain their names. They're just arranged in a different permutation or order, or again, the technical term is inversion. So this is what's known as first inversion, because of the 3rd of the chord. Do you remember which one that is? B, the 3rd of this tetrachord, is on the bottom, is in the bass. So this is first inversion of the G7 chord. Another way of saying this is that this is a G7 chord over B, meaning what's the entity? G7. What's in the bass? B. So G7 over B. Same thing is true if you do it in the left hand. Here's that G7 chord over B. It really doesn't matter where you are on the keyboard, as long as the lowest note is B in the particular configuration that you're using, then you've got a G7 chord in first inversion or a G7 chord over B. Okay, great. So we've reviewed these 2 chords back from page 36. So here's your C major chord, and here's your G7 tetrachord, or we can just say chord, it's easier, less of a mouthful than tetrachord, in first inversion or G7 over B. So practice just alternating between C, G7, and C. Okay. Now, kind of a quick trick here is to remember that you are still using that 5-finger position on C4, but when you switch to the G7 chord, your thumb has to kind of reach over to the left by a half step or a semitone to B. So don't forget that, because a very common mistake that my students have made in the past is when switching from C to G7, they don't move their thumb and they end up playing this. Can you hear that difference? That the C didn't move? So I'm playing C, F, and G. Now, this is another chord. It's a perfectly acceptable chord. It's just not G7. This, in fact, is a C sus, because the F, as it were, is suspended. This we'll have to review in another lesson. But the F is suspended before it ultimately moves or resolves down to E, forming the C major triad that you know. So listen to this sound with the F suspension. And here's the F about to resolve down to E. Right, you should feel a a sense of real accomplishment that you finally got to that E, right? So here's that tense suspended F and the resolution to E. It's really quite lovely. But that's not the G7 chord. The G7 chord means that your thumb moves down to B, your fourth finger is on F, and your fifth finger is on G, and you play, and then back to C. Okay? Now, if you want to practice this in a more formal way, look at the bottom of page 36, and you've got those same three chords, C, G7, and C, repeated, right? That's what those two dots mean. And you remember that these are chord symbols that tell you what to play, which chord to play. So actually, let's try this exercise. So we're going to count 4 beats for each one of these whole notes, and then we're going to repeat, as simple as that. So let's try that together. We're going to start with our preparatory beats. 1, 2, ready, and C, 2, 3, 4, G7, 2, 3, 4, back to C, 2, 3, repeat, 2, 3, 4, 2, 3, 4, 2, 3, 4, release. Okay, so do that as many times as you need to get comfortable with this shift. And most importantly, or maybe not most, but among the most important things that you have to be worried about is that the 3 notes that you're playing, because they're harmonic, meaning you play them at the same time, they have to be together. So try to have all 3 fingers come down on all 3 keys simultaneously. Or, right, make sure it's really together and listen carefully, because if something like this happens, not quite together, right? Not quite together. So make sure it's all really pointed and focused. Okay? All right. We can now move on to Marianne. So I want you to take a look at this piece, and it does seem kind of intimidating because it's long. It takes up the entire page, just like back on page 30 with Jingle Bells, that took up the entire page, all 4 systems, 1, 2, 3, 4, 4 measures in each system, 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. So it looks like it could be potentially very complicated, but in reality, it's actually very repetitious. So we're going to do what we've been doing all along. We're going to look at this visually, we're going to analyze verbally, and then we're going to play so that we always know what to expect and what to anticipate as we perform this piece and as we learn the piece. So let's start with what seems somewhat straightforward. The right hand, right, notice the treble clef, the right hand only comes in the last measure of every system. Right, here it is in measure 4 of system 1, measure 4 of system 2, and so on. And the only 2 chords that you have to worry about are G7 and C. So that absolutely simplifies our life. Not only that, but the rhythms are identical throughout. 2 quarters and a half, 2 quarters and a half. Same thing here, and same thing here. So why don't we just jump in and learn this? Let's start with the G7 chord. So it's 2 quarters and a half. Right, so remember, here's our G7 chord, thumb, first finger on B, 3, fourth finger on F4, fifth finger on G4, and we're going to play this 3 times, 2 quarters and a half. Remember those rhythms? 1, 2, ready, and 1, 2, 3, 4, release. Right? Make sure you hold out that half note for the full duration of 2 beats. In this case, 2 quarters. How do I know 2 quarters? The time signature, 4/4, means there are 4 quarter notes in every metric cycle or cycle of beats, right? Fancy way of saying one single measure, okay? Let's switch down to the second system and do exactly the same thing with the C major triad. Same rhythm, quarter, quarter, half. So for the C major chord, thumb on C, third finger on E, and fifth finger on G. And let's play that. Here we go. 1, 2, ready, and 1, 2, 3, 4, release. Just to be thorough, let's do that for the last 2 systems as well. So back to G7, and then to C. So here's the G7 chord, same rhythms. Ready? And 1, 2, 3, 4, release, and the C major triad or chord. Ready? And 1, 2, 3, 4, release. Okay, so there, we've learned, that was easy, right? We've learned the right hand. Now the challenging thing, of course, is to coordinate this with the left hand. Now why is that challenging? It looks like the left hand isn't doing anything. Well, it isn't. When the right hand is playing, the left hand is simply sustaining the last note that it plays in measure number 3. As you can see, this is F3 as a half note, tied, which means a rhythmic extension, tied to a whole note, of course on the same letter, on the same key, F3, because a rhythmic extension, a tie, can only extend the same pitch or the same key in the same octave. So as a result, you're holding this F for a total of 2 beats in this measure and 4 beats in this measure, so 6 beats. And then the right hand comes in while the left hand sustains. The challenge is to keep the left hand down. Now look over here in the second system. It's exactly the same pattern. A half note, this time on E, right? That's the third space in the bass clef. So this is E3 tied over to a whole note on E3, and then the right hand comes in. Same thing in system number 3. We have an exact repetition of system number 1. So F3 as a half note, sustained for a whole note. And then a bit of a difference in system number 4, instead of having E3 sustained for 6 beats, you have C3 on the second space in the bass clef, sustained as a half note, tied to a whole note. So let's practice the left hand and then coordinate the right hand, and then we're kind of going to move backwards through each system so that we can tie it all together. No pun intended with that word tie, but you get what I'm saying. All right, so let's begin with system number 1. So the left hand is in the standard 5-finger position on C3, which means that F is finger number 2. So we're going to sustain this. Here's the 5-finger position on C3, right? So 5th finger on C, 4th finger on D, 3rd finger on E, 2nd finger on F, there's F3, and thumb on, or 1st finger on G. So I'm going to sustain this F for 6 beats. Now remember, it starts on beat number 3, right? 1, 2, 3, and then holds through. So I'm going to count 1, 2, and then start sustaining F, and count one more cycle of 4 beats. So do this with me. Here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, release. Now let's do that one more time, and this time when I get through beats 3 and 4 and start the next cycle of 4, I'm going to add the right hand with the correct rhythm. Okay? So it's going to sound like this. So both hands in position. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, release. Right, so it looks straightforward enough, but make sure that that left hand doesn't come off when the right hand starts playing. It's a very simple thing, a simple mistake to make. So let's do that one more time. Okay, so here we go. Both hands in position. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, release. Okay, now if you've done that successfully, congratulations, you've just learned the exact same spot in system number 3 because it's the same. Let's worry about system number 2. So here you're sustaining E, and then over it, you're coming in with that C major triad. So let's break this up into 2 parts. First, let's just do the left hand by itself. So starting on beat 3, 1, 2, 3. So that's 3rd finger, your middle finger on E3. And so I'm going to count 1, 2, and then come in and hold this for the last 2 beats of measure 3, last 2 beats of measure 3, and all of measure 4. So just the left hand, please. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, release. Okay, now let's add the right hand. Remember, you're now on C. 1, 2, 3, 4. 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Release. Okay, let's just do that one more time just to really be practiced. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Release. Nice job. Now, do we really have to do system 3? No, because we've already done that in system 1. So let's skip ahead down to system number 4, where this time you're playing C3, of course as a half note, of course tied over to a whole note because we've already talked about this. So what finger do you use for C3? Well, that's the start of your C3 position. So that's finger number 5, your 5th finger. So let's practice this in 2 rounds. The first time, just the left hand. The second time, the right hand will come in as well. So round number 1, 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, release. Okay, round number 2, the right hand comes in on C, or the C major triad. Here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, release. Excellent. So let's review that really quickly from the start of the piece all the way down. That's all right. So I'm going to just play these 6 beat segments. So in system number 1 with F, 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, release. System number 2 with E and the C major triad, 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, release. Let's do system number 3 as well, just so we get used to looking at that spot when we're playing those measures. So if you have the music in front of you, look at system number 3. Don't look at 1, because when you're finally playing the entire piece, that may confuse you. Suddenly your eyes will dart back here when you're supposed to be playing over here. So look at this spot, system number 3. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, release. And system number 4 with your 5th finger on C3 and the right hand on the C major triad. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, release. Okay, so we're building. Let's go to the beginning of measure number 3 in each one of these systems. So we already know from beat 3 forward. Let's fill in these notes. Notice that the rhythm in this measure is the same as the right hand rhythm in the next measure. That is quarter, quarter, half, quarter, quarter, half, right? So this is, review the notes. This is E3 down to D3, and then you skip up to F3. So finger number 3 down to finger number 4, up to finger number 2. So let's play that. So again, in that 5-finger position, so finger 3 on E, down to finger number 4 on D, skipping up to finger number 2 on F. Okay, here it is. Let's put this into tempo. So 1, 2, ready, and. 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, release. Okay, that was pretty straightforward. So I didn't announce it, but you could tell what I did. I played these 2 measures without the right hand. Let's play these 2 measures now with the right hand. So starting with beat number 1 in measure 3, where it says Mary Ann. So we're going to add the right hand. 1, 2, ready, and. 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, release. Okay. Now, just like I observed before, these 2 measures here are the same as these 2 measures there. So if you've done this well, you've also learned these 2 measures as well. So we don't really have to worry about these for now. Let's go over to system number 2. So we know, of course, everything from this E forward. Let's figure out these 2 notes. So on the 3rd line, bass clef, that's D3, finger number 4. This is C3, just like down here. This is C3 on finger number 5, and then up to finger number 3. So let's play this in 2 rounds. The first time, let's just play these 2 measures with the left hand, no right hand. So that's 4, 5, 3. Right, make sure you kind of plan them out before you play them in time. So 4 on D, 5 on C, 3 on E. Okay, so let's do that in time. So just the left hand. 1, 2, ready, and. 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, release. Okay, let's play that a second time, this time with the triad, okay, with the C major triad. So ready, and. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, release. Okay, and since we've already done the first system and the third system is the same, let's go over to the fourth system where there's only 1 note difference, which we've already done. So compare this measure to this measure. D, C, E, and down here, D, C, C. So that's a pretty simple shift, right? 4th finger on D, down to 5th finger on C, and then 5th finger repeats and holds through the end of the piece. So let's try that together, okay? So we're going to do the left hand first. So it's 4, 5, 5. Okay, so let's do that in time. 1, 2, ready, and. 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, release. And now let's add the right hand, which plays, of course, the C major triad. Ready, and. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, release. Okay, let's, just like we did the last time when we were worried about just the last 6 beats of each system, let's now just run through and play the last 2 measures of each system, and we'll include system 3 in this, again, so you get used to looking at this system, even though it's the same, these 2 measures are the same as these 2 measures in system 1. Okay, I apologize for all the extra noise, but what can I say? We have a musical household. So let's try it. All right, we're going to start with the last 2 measures of system 1. 1, 2, ready, and. 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, release. Let's jump down to system number 2. Ready, and. 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, release. Okay, system number 3, just like system 1. Ready, and. 1, 2, 3, 4. Release. And finally, system number 4. Ready, and. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Release. Okay, so the good news is we have learned half of this piece, just not in a very traditional way, because remember, after all, music is read left to right and top down. But we have done this. We've taken sort of the last 2 columns, if you will, and we've learned all of this material. So now let's learn all of this material. So you've by now understood that the first system, at least with these last 2 measures, is identical to the last 2 measures of the third system. Let's see if that's also the case for the first 2 measures. Not exactly, right? Here, you see a bunch of half notes, right? Those are those open note heads plus the stems. But down here, that's not what you see. You see 4 quarter notes in this first measure of system 3, followed by a half note, and then followed by 2 quarters. But let's go a little more in depth before we just observe, or rather, in addition to just observing the rhythms. What note is this? Third space, that's E3, skips up to the 4th space, which is G3. That leaps down a 5th to the 2nd space, which is C3, and then comes, as it were, full circle back to the starting note, E3. All right, so let's hear that. So that's E up to G, down to C, back up to E, all in the third octave. And the fingering here is 3, up to 1, down to 5, back up to 3. So here's 3, skips up to G on 1, leaps down to C on 5, skips up to E on 3. Okay, now we can also put this into a time frame if we want, which is 2 beats per half note. So that's ready, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, release. So those are the first 2 measures of System 1. Let's take a look at the first 2 measures of System 3. What 2 notes are these? Quarters. Oh, that's E3, just like that half note. What 2 notes are these? These 2 quarters are G3, just like that 1 half note. This is C3, half note, same thing as this C3 half note. And then at the end, we come full circle back to E3 with 2 quarters, just like this 1 half note. That is the same note, but different rhythms. So it's almost like, well, it's not almost like, it is like the half notes, with the exception of C3, have all been split into 2 quarter notes. So the pitches are all the same, but the rhythms are different. So this, as we explored in a previous lesson, is just a rhythmic variation of the prime, that is how it was first presented to us in this piece. So let's play these 2 measures. So the same 3 notes, right? E, G, and C, and then come full circle back to E, but now with quarters, halves, and then a quarter. So let's try it. So 1, 2, ready, and. 1, 2. All right, that was System 3. So you can hear clearly how aligned this is with System number 1. It's just rhythmically different. So we figured out that much. Let's take a look again visually before we really put all of this together at Systems 2 and 4. So half note, 2 quarters, half note, half note. Jump down to System 4. Half note, 2 quarters, half note, half note. Well, okay, the rhythms are the same. Let's take a look at the pitch. So third line is D3, skips up to the 4th line, that's F3, leaps down a 5th, right, because that's 2 consecutive skips, right, 4th line to 3rd line to 2nd line, that's B, all right, in fact B2, and then that skips up to D. Okay, so D, F, B, and then full circle back to D, kind of the same pattern that we observed in Systems 1 and 3. That is, the first note you start with is also the note you end with at the end of measure number 2. Let's take a look at System 4. D, F, B, D. Okay, it's the same. So once we learn System number 2, we've also automatically learned System number 4. So let's try playing that. So we've got D on finger number 4, skipping up to F, F repeats, and then here's where it gets a little bit unusual. Because remember, in the 5-finger position for the left hand, your 5th finger is on C3, right? But here, the authors of the book even fill this in with the letter B to remind you that you have to use the same finger you would otherwise use on C3, but a half step lower on B. So you have to reach a bit. So you start with D, skip up to F, repeat that twice, or rather repeat that once more, and then you have to stretch, you see what I'm doing? Stretch that 5th finger down to B, and then come up back to D. So it might feel a little bit awkward to go from F down to B like that, but that's not really new to you. Where do you remember this stretch from? Well, that G7 chord, but for the left hand. Remember, we were reviewing it at the beginning of this lesson. So 5th finger on B2, 2nd finger on F3, and your thumb on G3. So instead of playing this harmonically, meaning all simultaneously, all at once, you're now playing it as a broken chord, or melodically, or if you remember the term from another lesson, an arpeggio, the Italian term for a broken chord. This harmonic entity broken into melody. One note after the other. Okay, so let's try that. We're going to look at the first two measures of system 2 or 4. It's the same thing. So we play half note on D, 2 quarters on F, leap down to B, and skip up to D. Now let's do that in time. So 1, 2, ready, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so now our job is to put all of this together. So let's see if we can make that happen. Since we're on system number 2 or 4, why don't we start with system 2 and just join the first 2 measures to the second 2 measures. All right, so let's try that together. So just as a quick review, I'm going to ignore the right hand for now. Let's just take a look at measures 3 and 4 really quickly. So that's D, C, E, or 4, 5, 3, and then you extend. So that sounds like this. Ready, and 3, 1, 2, just keep sustaining for 4 full beats, and you're done. Now let's go back to the first 2 measures where we are essentially, remember, breaking apart that G7 chord. We're just missing the G, obviously, but a lot of the same patterns. So first 2 measures, and then let's just continue and see how you do. So all of system number 2 for the left hand, ready, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, release. I hope that went well. Let's add the right hand to it. Okay, so exactly the same thing, but you add the C major chord at the end. Here we go, all of system number 2. 1, 2, ready, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, release. Now, this fourth system is so similar to the second system that we can just play it pretty much right away, because the only thing that we change, as you already know, is in the third measure, going into the fourth measure, instead of going C back up to E, C back up to E, we just stay on C and extend. So just for practice, let's play the fourth system once in the left hand only. So here we go. 1, 2, ready, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, hold for the final measure, release. Okay, let's add the right hand to that fourth system. So we're going to play the entire fourth system plus the C major chord at the end. Here we go. Ready, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, release. All right, we're getting there. We're almost done with this entire piece. Remember, we have these 2 columns done. We now have these 2 systems complete. Let's take a look at combining what we already know here in the first 2 measures with these 2 measures. So let's try playing the first system left hand only. Remember, we have our first pattern that goes E, skips up to G, leaps down to C, skips up to E, and then we have our older pattern, which we already know, which goes E, D, F, or 3, 4, 2. 3, 4, 2, and this extends for 6 beats. So let's try the first system, left hand only. Here we go. 1, 2, ready, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, release. Okay, excellent. Let's do that one more time, but this time adding the right hand, which is on G7. Remember, B is finger number 1, F is finger number 4, and G is finger number 5. That's the G7 tetrachord, or G7 over B. So all of system number 1 with the right hand at the end. Here we go. 1, 2, ready, and 2, 3, 4, 4, release. Right? Let's skip down to system number 3. We remember that the end is identical to what you just played, last 2 measures of system number 1, but the first 2 measures are a rhythmic variation of system number 1. That is, the half notes become quarter notes in most places. So let's review that really quickly. Here we go. First 2 measures of system number 3. 1, 2, ready, and. Okay, and of course you know the next 2 measures. 3, down to 4, skips up to 2 on F, and holds through the end of the system. So let's play all of system number 3, just the left hand. Ready, and. 1, 2, 3, 4, release. And now let's play it again, adding that G7 chord at the end. 1, 2, ready, and. Okay, so we're in the home stretch. We have obviously played each system individually. Now the hard part is putting them together. So let's try arranging this into bigger blocks before we play the complete piece from beginning to end. So let's try playing only systems 1 and 2, right? Back to back. Remember that technically, even though the system runs out, that doesn't mean that you take any timed break before you continue on to system number 2. All of this flows in terms of 4 beats to a measure until you get to the end, right? There are no breaks just because visually the system runs out. So let's try the first 2 systems, and as a quick reminder of something you've been seeing, but I haven't commented on this just yet, 2 things. The dynamic, mezzo forte for the left hand, so that's moderately loud, and then piano for the right hand. So balance this with more weight, more force for the left hand, less so for the right. That's the first observation. And the second observation is that this is all to be played moderately fast. Now look, of course that's subjective up to a point, so you take this at a tempo that works for you. So let's try the first 2 systems, okay? So a little bit louder in the left and more quietly in the right. So maybe this is mezzo forte for the left. And then for the right hand. Feels about right. So let's try the first 2 systems only. 1, 2, ready, and. 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, release. Okay. Now, of course, easier said than done. You may have had a problem following the first system, going directly to this D in the left hand. So how do you do this? you practice, just like we did in some earlier pieces, you practice the connection from the first system only to the beginning of the second system. So why don't we try this? Let's play from the third measure of system 1 through the first measure of system number 2. So just those 3 measures, 1, 2, 3. So we're going to start right there with that E on finger number 3, and we're going to end right there with the last beat on F with finger number 2. So here we go. Just those 3 measures to get the connection. 1, 2, ready, and. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, release. So you play that as many times as you have to really get that smooth connection. But let's try playing all of systems 1 and 2 one more time, and then we're going to do the same thing with systems 3 and 4, and then we'll put the whole piece together. So one more time for systems 1 and 2, and let's challenge ourselves. Let's play a bit faster. 1, 2, ready, and. Okay, so we're going to create that sort of unnatural break, and we're going to play systems 3 and systems 4 all in a row. Now, if you're not entirely confident about the connection from system 3 to 4, notice that it is identical to the connection from system 1 to 2. So a good strategy would be actually to play the same thing we just did, that is the last 2 measures of system 3 and the first measure of system 4, even though it's the same material as these 2 measures and this measure, nonetheless, you'll keep your eyes on the right place. So let's do that just once. You're going to really specifically look here, play through these 2 measures and through the first measure of system 4. So just once through, and kind of at a faster pace, just to force yourself to concentrate. 1, 2, ready, and. 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, release. Okay, pretty straightforward. Let's try playing all of systems 3 and 4. Remember that at the end, it's 4, 5, 5. Sorry for my bad singing, but that's what it sounds like. Right? As opposed to going back up to E, you move down to C here. Okay, good. Let's try it. Systems 3 and 4. Remember the rhythmic variation at the start of system number 3. 1, 2, ready, and. Okay, now the challenge is to play the entire page. So, if you have any doubts, what you need to work on is the bridge connecting system 2 to system 3. So we can do this exactly as we had done before. System 1 to 2, system 3 to 4. Let's play the last 2 measures of system 2 and the first measure of system 3. So here we go. 1, 2, ready, and. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And that's it. So the trick here is, obviously you're sustaining this E on finger number 3 through the end of system 2, and then you have to repeat that same finger here at the start of system number 3. So just be sure to lift your hand slightly. So in other words, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2. So you can see me lifting. That's really crucial. Okay, so let's try that one more time. The connection from system 2 to 3, last 2 measures of system 2, and the first measure of system 3, and then we're going to try to play the entire piece from beginning to end. Here we go. 1, 2, ready, and. That's it. All right, we are ready to play the entire piece from beginning to end, remembering to try to do this moderately fast, mezzo forte for all of the left hand, and piano for all entrances of the right hand on those chords, either G7 or C. So let's see what happens. Here we go. All of Marianne on page 37. 1, 2, ready, and. Well, you know what? Just for fun, let's do that one more time. And this time, I'm not going to snap. I'm just going to play with that internalized beat, so you're not always hearing some external pulse as I play. So one more time, slightly faster just for the challenge. Here we go. 1, 2, ready, and. Oh, I hope that was fun for you. So just as a summary of what we did today to get through this whole page, we practiced and learned this out of order. And that's really significant for a piece like this, where we start with the more challenging components, that is coordinating left and right hand at the end of each system, and then work our way backward so we can first learn, as it were, these two columns, and then secondly, learn each system individually, always looking for repetitions, always looking for areas where the first material is presented, if not identically, then similarly through some sort of variation, and then ultimately putting everything together and, very, very crucially, working on those bridges from system 1 to 2, 2 to 3, and 3 to 4 before finally assembling everything and playing it from beginning to end.